How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to part 4 of how to build a shed slash playhouse. Let's get started. So in this video, we're going to be covering the rafters, the sheathing, the plywood, and the wood trim. So stick with us and we'll go through it all together. So what we're using right here for the ridge board is going to be an 2x8 by 10 foot board. And the reason being is our shed's 8x8 and we want a 1 foot extension on both sides. This is the bracing we're going to be using in order for the ridge board to sit on each side of the top plates. Refer to my how to build a ridge board and a rafter video for this. This portion right here, we're using a 312 pitch. The height pitch of our roof is going to be 16 inches. Basically 3 times 4 feet, which is our run, is 12 inches plus an additional 4 inches for on top of the bird's mouth. That's how we got the pitch of the roof. So this exact form right here is 16 inches to the top of that 2x8. Please again refer to my how to build a rafter in order to figure this part out. You can see the bracing that we used, and on both sides of the top plates we have the bracing with the ridge board in the middle, and we are going to be running our rafters off of this ridge board itself to the ending of the top plates. And let's get started with this part. Okay, so even though I covered this in my how to build a rafter and ridge board video, I'm going to go ahead and explain to you what I'm doing here regardless. So we're going to 312 pitch. So using the square here, top portion is going to be set at 3, and the of one side on your tongue, and your blade side is going to be sitting on 12, the top. So what we have going on is I'm doing a step-off system. Basically what I'm doing is starting with one side and moving my way down 4 feet. The reason being is my run is 4 feet long. The span of the building is actually 8 feet. Half of that's your run. So 4 feet is how many step-offs I'm going to be going. So at the end, you can make whatever size tail you want on the ridge board, but it's called a rafter tail, but any size that you want, we are going actually just 6 inches off. So instead of a foot, we're going 6 inches. So that's the difference we're going to be making with the rafter tail itself. Don't forget the middle of the ridge board is 3/4 of an inch. So even though you're doing the step-off system, you still need to go back to the very first marking you made, the very first measurement, and remove 3/4 from that. So that way that the ridge board is plumb with the actual rafter, and then it's going to sit right on top of your top plate with the bird's mouth. So again, it's very easy to understand with the rafter video that I made. Right here I'm just showing you that the rafter video does work with this. And just, again, tune into that, please, in order to figure this part out. The video itself goes into more detail on the specifics for measurements, and doesn't matter what pitch you're making, it doesn't matter what size building you're working on, and it'll explain to you step by step on what to do and how to get your exact measurements for your rafters. Okay, so it doesn't matter what tool you use at this point. You can use a circular saw or you can use a worm drive. I love the worm drive. It is a much more accurate tool, I believe. However, a circular saw does just as good. So just keep in mind, all you're doing is making your cuts on your plumb cut, right where the ridge board meets the actual rafter, your bird's mouth, and your rafter tail. Those are the only cuts you're making on this entire board. Once you have this cut out, put it up against the board on your structure, your shed, or your playhouse, whatever you're making, and make sure that it fits. Once that does fit tight and snug and everything looks good, there's your template. And all you're going to do is use that template and trace around the other rafters and make your cuts. Okay, so like I said, once you have your rafter, the first one cut out and everything looks good, the plumb cut looks good, the bird's mouth, everything fits, and your rafter tail obviously is going to fit because it's not hooking up to anything, but regardless, it's the size that you want. Now you have your template. Now you're going to be able to trace this out onto the other pieces of on your other rafters and cut them out, the 2x6x8s that we're using here. And you'll do this for each rafter. So the job is always easier when you have at least 2 people on this. You got one person making the measurements and all the tracing out on the templates, and you got one person making the cuts. Okay, one very important tip when cutting the bird's mouth out. Do not fully cut through as other people do. You want to make sure that you cut with a handsaw the remainder of the way to avoid any splitting. Okay, so once you have a routine down and everything's running smooth, you can have 2 people working, one person making the cuts on the rafter board, the other person making the plumb cuts, one person making the bird's mouth cut. Once you have a certain pattern going down, it's going to run through smoothly. So you can see what my dad's doing here is he's cutting out the bird's mouth. I figured out on the miter saw stand itself, the miter saw, the exact degree cut to the actual rafters. So instead of cutting the actual plumb cut or the rafter tail out with the circular saw, what I did is I found out, I believe it was around like 15 degrees. And I was able to figure out that on the miter saw cut. And so I was able to cut the rafter tail and the plumb cut right where the rafter board meets the ridge board. I was able to make those 2 cuts, get them ready, get them prepared, and then have my dad cut out the actual bird's mouth itself. So, like I said, once you have a certain pattern going down and everything looks like it's running smooth, then stick with it. It's always easier when you have a certain routine. That's why these jobs itself can go up in 1 day or 2 days at the most when you have a crew of 5 or 6 or even more people. But with 2 guys and doing this on the side, we like to take our time, enjoy actually the work. We're not trying to make money out of it. All we're trying to do is just enjoy our time working with tools and wood. Alright, so now moving over to looking at our rafters, you can see that everything's cut, everything's plumbed, pretty much everything's the same. You got your rafter tails that are the same, you got your plumb cut that's the same, you got your bird's mouth that are all cut out the same. Everything looks good. I really can't wait to see what this thing looks like going up onto the ridge board. Just making a couple final cuts and we're ready to put these up. Okay, so a very important part that you got to remember. These rafters sit on top of your studs. That's where you want the weight to be holding. So you want your stud to hold the weight of the rafter as well. You don't want to just put your rafters anywhere in the middle of your studs. You want to make sure you're going on top of your studs. So we're going to be marking off right here. We're going to be making our center marks basically with an X on the side so you know which side your rafter is going to be sitting on, as well as the ridge board. Make sure you do that so you're always just leveled and straight with everything. Okay, so you're going to have one person where the top plate's at, and you're going to have one person at the ridge board. Remember, these frames were built at 24-inch on centers. So the studs are at 24-inch on centers. So our ridge board should be 24-inch on centers as well. That way it lines up directly on top of the stud on the frame. So all you have to do for this part is the easiest part of the entire framing of the roof is nailing in from one side of the ridge board into the actual rafter into the other side. Just make sure everything is straight. Concentrate on that top portion lining up with your ridge board. Now everybody has their own way of doing this. However, we love clamps. We like things to be tight. Okay, so we want to make sure that we are using a clamp at the edge of our rafter tail and hooking it up to the top plate. That way we know we're tight when we nail in. We're not going to have any issues with any mistakes. You can see everything here is plumbed and straight and leveled off. Okay, so one trick to making sure that everything's leveled off is you don't want to start one rafter, next rafter, next rafter, next rafter. What you want to do is go from one side of the ridge board, even close to the end, and move to your opposite side. That's what's going to help you make sure that everything is straight. Obviously, this ridge board's going nowhere. It's strapped in. I mean, it's going to take a whole car to knock this thing down. But regardless, you want to make sure that you're doing this the right way. So make sure that you are at the edge of your shed or the structure that you're building, and you're putting your ridge boards up on the opposite sides, and then you can move into the middle portion once you're done with that. It's just common practice, and it's basically what actually makes everything leveled off, plumbed, squared. You know, you don't want to just start from one side and work your way down to the other. Work on one side, start on the other side, and then work your way in the middle. All right, now that we're going to the opposite side of the ridge board for the other rafter, everything's going to be the same exact process. You're putting it on top of your stud. You're making sure it's on your 24-inch on center, your 16-inch on center, depending on what you're doing. You're using the clamp, making sure that everything's tight, lined up before you nail it in. Now remember, some structures are allowed 2x4 rafters. Small structures such as dog houses, things like that. We're using 2x6s here, obviously. The wider the wood, the more nails you're going to be putting in. 2x4 requires 2 nails. 2x6 requires 3 nails. 2x8 requires 4 nails. Again, the wider the wood, the more nails. Okay, once you're up to this portion itself, you're going to want to toe nail this portion into your top plate, the rafter into the top plate. Use a hammer and nail. If you try to use a nail gun, it's probably going to split your wood. Now, we are not going to leave it toe nailed. We are going to be strapping this in, which you'll see later on in the video. But for now, toe nail this. Alright, just a quick reference to what toe nailing is. All you're doing is angling the nail down from the rafter into the top plate, just like this. Very easy. Alright, so if you ever wondered what a 312 pitch looks like, well, here's your height of a 312. You know, if you're living in a place where there's a lot of snow, 312 is not going to be working for you. You're going to want to use at least a 612. But here in Tucson, Arizona, 312 is perfectly fine. You see the rafter tails coming out. They look small, but once you have your all your fascia board up and everything like that, it's going to look wonderful in the end. Alright, so now we're up to putting the fascia on the side of the rafter tails here. So keep in mind, you can do whatever you want for fascia. You can use whatever you want. I'm using a 1x here. You can use a 2x6x8, or actually you want a 10, because if you want that foot overhang, you need to make sure you have 2 extra feet and 1 foot on each side, right? So again, if you're using a 1x, they're flimsier than a 2x6. Keep that in mind. You're going to have to work out the bows. All I'm doing here is marking on my rafter so I know where my foot overhang is going to be on each side. And all I'm going to do is tack this in for now. I'm not nailing it in hard with nails. All I'm doing is using some little finish nails here and tacking them in. I guess they're called panel nails. Alright, so you can see our fascia board is up, and what we're doing on top is you see a long level. You can use a 2x4 for this as well, but you want to make sure that everything is touching the rafters for your exterior fascia board, which is the same cut as a rafter out here. This little torpedo level I'm using, you can see the fascia board is hanging a little lower than the rafters. That's what you want in order for the plywood to lie flat. You want to make sure that there's a straight edge of some sort hitting that. Okay, so you can see the progress so far. A couple more things that we need to do is each corner of this shed is going to need a rafter as well. Alright, so make sure that you put those corners up on each corner of the shed. And the reason being is that you need that support when you're putting your panel board against the exterior portion against the rafters. So remember that you're gonna need at least 4 more rafters to tie into that ridge board. We're also going to be putting some straps on, and you're going to want to put some joist hangers on against the ridge board. So I didn't put any joist hangers on at this time, but later on in the video you'll see the joist hangers. If not this video, the next one for sure. But again, there will be joist hangers against this ridge board. These are the straps that we use in order to tie the rafters into the top plate. Just keep in mind, if we were not using this type of panel board, if we were going maybe some sort of plywood on the exterior and then going over with a different type of material, you can use a different type of strap on the outside of your shed. But because we use the panel board, we have to tie in from the inside so your strap's not showing on the outside. All you need is 1 strap on each rafter. However, I like to be secure. I'm going to be putting 2 on. And these straps are very easy to put in. There's like 4 or 5 holes in them on each side. I use every single hole. I put all my nails into all of them. Now, some people will tell you all you need is 2 nails, all you need is 3 nails, all you need is 1 nail. I would never recommend only putting 1 nail in there, but I believe that every hole is used for a reason. I'm putting nails in all of them. So I want this thing strapped, secured. I don't want to have to worry about this thing in the future ever. So I'm going to do it right the first time. Alright, so we have all our straps in on the rafters themselves. This is as many straps as we're going to be putting on the rafters. We're not going to do anything additional with the rafters for straps or anything like that. This is it. This is your final product for actually strapping in, tying in your rafters to the top plate. And they will be secure. And as explained earlier, you can see the rafter on the edge, the corner rafter we have here. This is what we put in. So you want to make sure you have one rafter on each corner of your shed as well. Not only is it going to act as extra support, but this is what your panel is going to be actually hooking onto on the end run. So we notched it out on the very top where the support system's at. You could do that on the ground level or you could do that on top level. It doesn't matter, whatever you're more comfortable with. So it's time to put the plywood up. You can see it's all flushed against the actual fascia board. All we're doing is tacking this in right now. We're going to make sure everything's leveled off, and we're going to go forward with that. So you want to make sure that your plywood is at a staggering motion, and that's the reason why we have it hanging off on one side. We're going to put a small portion on the left side, and we're going to stagger it on the top and the middle until it hits the actual ridge board itself. And you're going to do the same exact thing with the other side. Alright, while working on this project, my wife's father stopped by and was taking a look at it. I explained to him that my next purchase is definitely going to be a worm drive, just like my dad has, and he decided to bring me a little surprise from his car. His 30-year-old Skillsaw worm drive that he wants me to keep, and he told me that he's going to borrow it from me when he needs it. Couldn't be more grateful. I mean, this saw is in great condition, and for being 30 years old, I mean, I can't wait to use this thing. Okay, so we have all these pieces up so far for the plywood. Now we're just making this small cut, this little small piece of plywood that we're putting up where it meets the ridge board itself. Once you have all these pieces measured and cut and everything looks good, go ahead and nail these in, and then we'll be cutting off the edges. Alright, so we made some chalk lines from the bottom of the rafter where the fascia board's at to the top of the rafter where it meets the actual ridge board. That way we have a line running up so we know exactly where we're going to be nailing these in. Every 4 to 6 inches is going to be sufficient enough for these nails. Just make sure that you're actually hitting every single rafter. And with the angle of the camera here, you could probably see the chalk lines a little bit better. You can see how we ran a chalk line from the fascia board up to the top of the ridge board on each rafter. And you can see that all I'm doing here is going every 4 to 6 inches, nailing the plywood into the rafters. Just make sure that you're going to every single rafter, and make sure you're going about every 4 to 6 inches on the nails. You can see that there's black lines also on this plywood. Those are preset lines. They are set for you to be able to use at 16-inch or 24-inch on centers. Alright, so this portion is nearly done with the plywood. Definitely don't want to leave it looking like this, so we're going to have to cut this off. This part right here doesn't take too long. All you got to do is cut off the portions that are actually extending beyond the shed. Make sure you're only cutting that. So the easiest way to do this is just to transfer numbers. All you're getting is a tape measure. You're going to see how long this is actually extending beyond the actual rafter itself or the fascia board. And transfer that number to the top of that piece of plywood. Use a chalk line if you need to get a straight line. Just transfer that number, make your marking, and then make your cut. So just make sure that you are measuring each corner of the piece of plywood that's actually extending beyond the rafter or the fascia board. The reason being is everybody knows that nothing is ever cut perfect, whether or not the blade went off a little bit or it chipped a little bit of piece of wood or whatever the case is, or you measured wrong or something went on the angle. We know that it's not going to be perfect, so measure each corner and snap a line and then cut it. So once you have your chalk line, your measurement down on this one little piece of plywood here, you're going to make the cut. You're going to do the same exact thing for each piece that's sticking out beyond the actual frame. Once you cut all your pieces of plywood that are extending beyond the fascia board, you should have something that looks like this. Clean cut and flushed. It's going to be ready for the drip edge, the roofing paper, and the shingles. Alright, so we are ready to go ahead and start putting up the products for the top of this roof. Before we start doing anything else with the roof, I wanted to do a couple additional jobs. Last night I came outside and started painting all the trim with some brown paint, something that's going to match the wood of the house. I wanted everything to kind of match around and look the same. So I did all this last night. I'm also going to put the remainder of the panels up against this edge rafter here where it meets the top plate. All I'm going to do is take the measurement and I'm going to cut 4 different pieces in order for these to fit. I just transferred the measurement from that portion onto this new piece of panel. So I wanted this new cut to be running the same exact way as the panels that are around the shed already. I wanted the vertical straight up and down with the design. You can do whatever you want. If you want to go horizontal, you can do that as well. It's going to look good, but I wanted the exact same design. You can even use a whole different type of board as long as it's the same thickness as the panel that you already had put on. Again, all I'm doing, I transferred my numbers, made my measurements, made my lines, and all I'm using is a circular saw here to make my cuts. That's it. Once you have all your pieces cut, all we're going to do is use a nail gun with a compressor and nail it in. Just make sure everything fits before you actually start nailing. And here's your cutout piece. So again, all we're going to be using here is a nail gun and a compressor. So just make sure that you have enough nails and you're using what I used here is the 18 gauge nails. Whatever fits works as long as it holds it in. Here is one panel board up. You're going to have to do this 4 times. All I did was nail the panel board to the wood, the rafter at the end, the top plate, and then this support system right here for the ridge board. And here are 2 panels at the front of the shed. I have the same 2 panels on the back side also. You can see the seams in the front and the back also, but don't worry about that at all. The trim that we painted, it's going to cover over all those seams and it's going to look like there was never anything even cut. So again, just keep that in mind. If you made a little nick or a little mess up on one of the cuts, don't worry about it. The trim's going to cover over all of it. So as you can see, I'm just going to be putting these pieces of trim up. All I'm doing is using the same compressed nail gun. I have to angle this off, make sure it's right where I want it, covering over all the seams. You're going to nail in one side of this panel, of this new trim that we're putting up. Once you have one nailed on, you're going to use your little level, put it up there, and make sure it's leveled off, make sure it's still covering over all the seams. Once you have that covering over all the seams, you can nail it off from there. Just make sure that it's leveled and you're only nailing one side in to start this job. The good thing about finished nails is that you can't see them. If you look really close, obviously you can. I'm putting enough nails here to make sure that this thing's never going to move. Once you do one side, move your ladder over to the other side and go ahead and start nailing that in. You know that this is going to be in place as long as you know that you're not going to be removing this. Otherwise, you're going to have to pry this thing off and take all the nails out. So make sure that it's done the right way the first time. And you can use whatever color you want for the trim, obviously. This is your shed. This is your project. I just wanted to match the house. Now remember to do the corners of your shed as well. All we're doing is covering over all the seams. The main objective to trim is covering over everything. All the cuts that you made, all the seams that you have exposed. That's the whole point in trim. Not only does it make it look finished and right, that's the main objective, is just covering over everything. So again, do this nicely, do it right, paint it whatever color you want. This is your final touch to your entire structure. So here's the progress so far. We're also going to do the same with the back side. I'm also going to add some trim up to that ridge board. And here's the piece of trim that I ran up to the ridge board. You can use whatever size you want. I decided to go with a thinner piece. After I finished the trim around the corners and the top and where all the seams were at, where the panels meet, to include the actual ridge board area, around that area, I went ahead and got started on the window. The window around that is just a square. Later on down the road, I'm going to go ahead and put an additional trim on top of this square portion around the window with 45-degree cuts. I'm just going to make it stand out just a little bit more. You can see the back side here. Everything is done the same exact way as the front side. The only difference obviously is there's no door or window. So all the trims cut the same length, the same design. I wanted to keep the front the same as the back. You could do whatever you want with this. Remember, the trim, the objective is actually to cover over all the seams, but it's what actually makes this structure look like a wonderful structure. So it's what makes it stand out. So whatever color you want to paint the trim, you're going to make it your own. If you want pink, blue, red, it doesn't matter. Brown, I only picked that to match the house. And as promised before, we have our joist hangers in against the ridge board where the rafters meet. This thing is tied down in so many ways. It's, toe-nailed, it's strapped, it has its joist hangers. I mean, nothing's going to rip this roof off unless a hurricane comes in, which hopefully it doesn't happen here in Tucson. But again, thanks for watching the video. Stay tuned. We are going to put some shingles up and the roofing paper on the next video. So thank you again for watching.